My name is Mary, and I grew up in what most people would call a typical middle-class family. Mom worked as an accountant at a local firm, Dad was a project manager at a construction company, and then there was Daisy, my sister, 3 years younger than me. "Mary, you need to set a better example for your sister," Mom would say almost daily. "You're the oldest, you should know better." I heard that phrase so many times growing up that it became like a broken record playing in my head. Whether it was about keeping my room clean, getting good grades, or just general behavior, the expectations for me were always higher. I remember one particular evening when I was 16 and Daisy was 13. We were both sitting at the dining room table doing homework. I had my calculus textbook open, working through complex equations, while Daisy was doodling in her notebook, supposedly working on her English essay. "Mom," Daisy called out. "I don't feel like doing this essay. It's too hard." Mom came in from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "Oh, sweetie, it's okay. You're trying your best. Maybe you can work on it tomorrow when you're feeling more inspired?" I couldn't help but scoff, remembering how different the response had been when I'd struggled with an assignment the previous week. "Is something funny, Mary?" Mom's tone had shifted completely. "No," I replied, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Just solved a problem." "Well, focus on your own work. You know you need to maintain those grades if you want to get into a good college." That was another sore point. From as early as I can remember, I'd dreamed of going to Princeton. Their computer science program was legendary, and I'd worked my butt off to maintain a 4.0 GPA, participated in every relevant extracurricular activity I could find, and even started a coding club at my high school. But when I brought up Princeton during my junior year, my parents shut it down immediately. "Mary, be realistic," Dad said during dinner one night. "Private colleges are expensive, and we need to save money for Daisy's education. You know she might need extra support. Your grades are good enough to get into any state school with a scholarship." Later that night, I sat in my room, staring at my Princeton brochure. My best friend Sarah came over and found me like that, cross-legged on my bed, surrounded by college materials. "They shot it down, didn't they?" she asked, sitting beside me. "Yeah," I sighed. "Apparently, I need to be realistic and save the college fund for Daisy." "But you know what? Fine. They want me to go to state? I'll go to state. But I'm going to make it work for me. I'm going to prove that I can make it on my own terms." Sitting there in my childhood bedroom, I made a pact with myself. I would succeed, not despite their limitations, but because of them. They had taught me one valuable lesson: if I wanted something in life, I would have to get it for myself. State University turned out to be exactly what I needed. I threw myself into my programming classes, often staying late in the computer lab long after other students had left. During my senior year, I had this idea that wouldn't leave me alone. I'd noticed how many people struggled with managing their daily tasks and routines. One night, while pulling another late study session, I started sketching out the framework for what would become Taskmaster, a revolutionary task management app that would change my life. I worked on the app between classes, during weekends, and even during holidays. When other students were partying or hanging out, I was debugging and refining my code. It became my passion, my obsession. After graduation, I took a huge risk. Instead of accepting any of the job offers that came my way, I decided to pitch my app to tech companies. Most ignored me, some politely declined, but then, tech giants showed interest. I'll never forget sitting in that boardroom, surrounded by executives in suits worth more than my entire wardrobe, watching as they tested my app. "This is impressive work," the CEO said, leaning forward. "Very impressive." The negotiations that followed were intense, but when the dust settled, I walked away with a check for $5 million. $5 million. I remember staring at the number in my bank account, my hands shaking. The first thing I did was buy a modest but nice apartment in a good area. The second was to start my own mobile app development company. The rest went into savings and investments. I wasn't about to blow this opportunity. When I told my family about the deal, their reactions were interesting. $5 million, Mom had to sit down. Are Mary? Dad just kept shaking his head, while Daisy stared at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. The dynamic shifted almost immediately. Suddenly, I wasn't just Mary the responsible older sister anymore, I was Mary the millionaire. And it didn't take long for that to become relevant. Just 2 years after I sold my app, Daisy graduated college and dropped her bombshell. I'm getting married, she announced during Sunday dinner. Tom proposed. I was genuinely happy for her. Tom seemed like a nice guy, and Daisy was glowing with excitement. Without hesitation, I offered to give her $20,000 for the wedding. Mom cleared her throat. You know, Mary, weddings these days are very expensive. I looked between them, confused. $20,000 is a lot for a wedding gift. But it's nothing to you now, Daisy said, her voice taking on that wheedling tone she'd perfected since childhood. And it's my only wedding. Don't you want your little sister to have her dream honeymoon too? We've been looking at this amazing resort in the Maldives. I sat there, feeling the familiar pressure of their expectations. The thing is, they weren't entirely wrong, I could afford more. And it was Daisy's wedding, a once-in-a-lifetime event. After some discussion and guilt-tripping, I agreed to pay for their honeymoon at the luxury resort in the Maldives on top of the wedding gift. After the wedding and honeymoon, a pattern started to emerge in my family's behavior that I couldn't ignore anymore. It was subtle at first, wrapped in jokes and casual comments, but it grew more obvious with each passing week. I bought Mom a designer handbag for her birthday. She smiled, but then said, "Oh, this is nice," though I saw a prettier one in the window of that luxury boutique downtown. But of course, this one is lovely too. Dad wasn't any better. When I helped him with some car repair costs, $1,000 for a new transmission, he chuckled and said, "You know, for someone who makes millions, you're pretty tight with your wallet." Could have thrown in an extra grand for new tires too. They meant these comments as jokes, but they stung. Each time I gave something, it felt like I was being measured against my bank account rather than my intentions. One Sunday afternoon, I was having coffee with Mom when she casually mentioned, "You know, your sister really loved that coffee maker you got her as a housewarming gift." Though she mentioned seeing a fully automatic espresso machine that would have been perfect for their morning routine. I set my cup down perhaps a bit too hard. "Mom, that coffee maker cost $500. Well, yes, but..." She waved her hand dismissively. "When you have as much as you do, what's a few hundred more between sisters?" Speaking of Daisy, she and Tom had been back from their honeymoon for 3 months, and they were still living with our parents. I found this odd, considering Tom had a decent job in finance and Daisy had started working as a marketing coordinator. "Why don't you guys look for your own place?" I asked Daisy one day while helping her organize her cluttered room, the same room she'd had since high school. She flopped onto her bed, surrounded by shopping bags from various boutiques. "Ugh, have you seen rental prices lately? It's ridiculous. We'd be throwing away money." "But you both have jobs." "Mary, not everyone can just buy an apartment outright like you did," she interrupted, rolling her eyes. "Some of us have to be practical." The irony of her calling living with our parents practical while surrounded by designer purchases wasn't lost on me. Mom had started dropping hints too. Every family dinner included some mention of the housing market. "Did you see that tiny house down the street sold for $500,000, she'd say, shaking her head. "It's criminal what they're charging these days. Normal people can't possibly afford to buy anything anymore." She'd always emphasize normal people while giving me significant looks. During one such dinner, she sighed heavily. "You know, when your father and I bought this house, things were different. Young couples could actually afford to buy homes. Now," she gestured at Daisy and Tom. "These poor kids don't stand a chance in this market." I dropped by my parents' house one Sunday afternoon, letting myself in with my spare key. The scene I walked into seemed oddly serious. Mom, Dad, Daisy, and Tom were huddled around the dining room table, papers spread out everywhere. They quickly shuffled them away when they saw me. "Oh, Mary, we didn't expect you today," Mom said, her voice a bit too bright. I caught glimpses of house listings and printouts of mortgage rates before they disappeared into a folder. "Just thought I'd stop by." "Everything okay?" "Everything's fine," Daisy chirped, but there was something in her voice I couldn't quite place. I didn't push it. If they were looking at houses, that was their business. Maybe Tom's parents had offered to help, or they'd saved up enough for a down payment. Either way, I was just glad they were finally planning to move out. 2 weeks later, Mom called. "Mary, we need to have an important family discussion. Can you come over tomorrow evening?" I immediately thought about her complaints about the refrigerator. She'd been mentioning it constantly, how it made strange noises, how the ice maker was broken, how food wasn't staying fresh long enough. When I arrived the next evening, the atmosphere was weirdly formal. Everyone was seated in the living room like it was some kind of intervention. Mom and Dad on the couch, Daisy and Tom in the armchairs, all facing the empty seat clearly meant for me. "Mary," Daisy started as soon as I sat down, her voice serious. "We've been having some family discussions." I nodded, waiting for the refrigerator request. "Tom and I have decided it's time for us to have our own home." "That's great," I said, genuinely pleased. "That's definitely the right decision." Daisy exchanged looks with our parents before continuing. "Well, since you're so successful now, and you have more money than you know what to do with." She paused for effect. "We've decided that you should buy us a house." The room went silent. I stared at her, certain I'd misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" "It makes perfect sense," Daisy continued, gaining momentum. "You have your own place. You bought it outright. Meanwhile, I'm still living with Mom and Dad. It's not fair." I looked around the room, waiting for someone to laugh, to say it was all a joke. But everyone's faces were dead serious. "I don't understand," I said slowly. "Why would I buy you a house?" "Because you're my sister," Daisy's voice rose. "You live in your own beautiful apartment while I'm stuck here. You have millions in the bank. I need my own place, and I'm not going to waste money on rent. You have the means to help me, so you should." I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "I'll tell you what I can do. If you need money for a down payment, I can provide an interest-free loan. We'll do it properly, through my lawyer." "A loan?" Daisy leaped to her feet. "Are you kidding me? You're just jealous, because I'm happily married and you're alone with your precious money." The accusation hit me like a slap. "Jealous? I gave you $20,000 for your wedding and paid for your honeymoon in the Maldives. That money could have covered my living expenses for a year." "Oh, here we go," Daisy sneered. Poor Mary, always counting pennies, despite her millions. "You're pathetic." "I earned every cent I have," I shot back, my own temper rising. "I built my company from nothing. I live within my means and invest in my business. I have employees who depend on me, obligations." "Obligations to everyone except your family," Mom interjected. Her face was a mask of disappointment I remembered from childhood. "I'm ashamed of you, Mary. How can you be so stingy?" "Stingy?" I laughed incredulously. "I've given Daisy more money in the past few months than most people make in a year." "And yet you live in your nice apartment while your sister has to live with her parents," Dad added. "What kind of sister are you?" I looked around the room at their hostile faces, my own family, looking at me like I was some kind of monster for not handing over hundreds of thousands of dollars on demand. Daisy stood up, smoothing her designer dress that I suddenly remembered was a birthday gift from me. "Here's how this is going to work. Either you buy us a nice house, not some cheap starter home, or you're no longer part of this family. It's your choice." Mom and Dad nodded in agreement. Tom sat silently, looking uncomfortable but not disagreeing. I looked at each of them in turn, Mom, Dad, Daisy, Tom. These people who had raised me, grown up with me, and were now trying to extort me. Without another word, I picked up my purse and walked to the door. "Mary," Mom called after me. "Don't you dare walk out that door." I paused with my hand on the doorknob, but didn't turn around. Walking out that door meant losing my family, but staying meant losing something equally important, my self-respect. I opened the door and left, their angry voices following me down the driveway. The bombardment started almost immediately after I left. My phone buzzed constantly with messages and calls from Mom and Daisy. I finally read some of them after a sleepless night. "How dare you walk out on your family like that," Mom's first message read. "After everything we've done for you." That last part made me snap. I called her back, my voice shaking with anger. "Everything you've done for me? Like what exactly, Mom? When I wanted to go to Princeton, you told me to figure it out myself. When I needed help with college, you said I should be independent. I worked 3 part-time jobs during college, just to afford a tiny apartment with roommates. We raised you," Mom shouted through the phone. "We put food on the table, clothes on your back. That's called being a parent, Mom. It's the bare minimum. Everything else, my education, my success, my company, I built that myself. While you were saving money for Daisy's college fund, I was working my ass off to make my own way." Aunt Linda's birthday party was the following weekend. I almost didn't go, but she'd always been kind to me, and I didn't want to miss it because of family drama. When I arrived at the restaurant, Mom, Dad, and Daisy were already there, sitting at the far end of the long table. I took a seat near Aunt Linda, and for a while, everything seemed civil. Then came the toasts. Aunt Linda's friends had just finished a sweet tribute to her when Mom suddenly stood up, wine glass in hand. Her cheeks were flushed, she'd already had several glasses. "I'd like to say something," she announced. "About ungrateful children who forget where they came from." The room went silent. Horror dawned on Aunt Linda's face. "My daughter Mary," Mom continued, her voice bitter, "sits there in her expensive clothes, with her millions in the bank, while her own sister needs a house. She refuses to help family. She's become a selfish, greedy person who—" "That's enough, Helen," Aunt Linda stood up. "This is not the time or place." But Mom wasn't finished. "She owes everything to us, and now she won't even help her sister buy a decent home." "Oh my God," my cousin Rachel whispered beside me. "Is she serious?" Daisy jumped in, her voice shrill. "She made me get a lawyer's contract, just to consider helping with a down payment." "Her own sister." I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I gave you $20,000 for your wedding and paid for your honeymoon. You're demanding I buy you an entire house." The other guests sat in stunned silence, forks frozen halfway to mouths, as years of family dysfunction played out before them. "I know Mary's been more than generous," Aunt Linda said firmly. "She helped pay for Tommy's diabetes treatment last year, and Sarah's college books." Other relatives started chiming in. Cousin Mike mentioned how I'd helped with his car repair. Aunt Sarah brought up the time I'd paid for her emergency dental surgery. With each example, Mom's face grew redder. "So she helps everyone except her own sister," Daisy shrieked. I couldn't take any more. I walked over to Aunt Linda, hugged her tightly, and whispered, "I'm so sorry about all this. Happy birthday." Then I left, the sound of arguing voices fading behind me. Later, I learned that the party essentially ended after I left, with guests quickly making excuses to leave. Several relatives called me afterward to offer support. The Facebook notification popped up on my phone 2 days after the birthday party disaster. My cousin Rachel had tagged me in a comment, "Mary, you need to see this." I clicked through to my mother's page and felt my stomach drop. There it was, a public declaration for all to see. With heavy hearts, John and I are officially disowning our eldest daughter, Mary. Her selfishness and ingratitude have shown us that she cares more about money than family. From this day forward, we have only one daughter, our beloved Daisy. The post had dozens of comments, mostly from family friends expressing shock and confusion. I sat there staring at my phone, feeling oddly calm. They'd finally done it, turned their emotional manipulation into a public spectacle. Without hesitation, I blocked them all: Mom, Dad, Daisy, even Tom. Phone numbers, social media, email, everything. It felt like cauterizing a wound, painful, but necessary. 2 months of blessed silence followed. I threw myself into my work, started therapy, and began to heal. Then came the call from Aunt Linda. "Mary, your mother's been trying to reach you," she said, her voice concerned. "She says it's urgent. She seems desperate." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. Somehow, I knew who it was. "Mary," Mom's voice was thick with tears. "Please don't hang up." I stayed silent, waiting. "Everything's falling apart," she continued. "We're going to lose the house. The loan we took out for Daisy's wedding, we used the house as collateral. We can't make the payments anymore." My grip tightened on the phone as she continued. "Your father lost his job. We're barely making ends meet. Please, Mary, we need help. You're our only hope." "I'm your only hope?" I repeated. "I thought you only had one daughter now." "You forced our hand," she snapped. "If you just helped your sister." "You're a stranger to me now, Mom," I interrupted. "You made that choice. Strangers don't get to demand money from me." Her voice turned ugly. "How dare you call your own mother a stranger? Have you no shame?" A bitter laugh escaped me. "Shame? You publicly disowned your daughter because she wouldn't buy your other daughter a house. A mother doesn't disown her child over money. A mother doesn't try to manipulate and shame her daughter into submission. You made your choice. Now live with it." I hung up before she could respond, my hands shaking but my resolve firm. The truth came out during a Sunday brunch with Aunt Linda, 3 months after Mom's desperate phone call. "Your father's not unemployed," she said, stirring her coffee. "He just switched to part-time work because he wanted a better work-life balance. And there's no bank threatening to take their house. They made it up to guilt you into giving them money." I should have felt angry, but instead, I felt oddly relieved. The manipulation was so blatant, so transparent, it somehow made everything clearer. Through the family grapevine, I learned that Daisy and Tom had finally moved out of our parents' house and into a rental apartment. Apparently, they were saving for their own place, exactly what they should have been doing all along. "They still talk about you at every family gathering," my cousin Rachel told me over lunch. "Daisy goes on and on about her selfish millionaire sister who wouldn't help her own family." "How do the others react?" Rachel laughed. "Honestly? Most people try to avoid inviting them nowadays. Nobody wants to spend holidays listening to them complain about you and their difficult lives." It was during that conversation with Rachel that something clicked inside me. I'd spent years trying to prove myself to my family, trying to earn their approval while simultaneously serving as their personal ATM. But their love had come with conditions, price tags, and endless demands. That evening, I made a decision. I called up Sophie, my old college roommate who'd become a personal stylist. "I need a change," I told her. "A complete transformation." The next few months were a whirlwind. Sophie helped me revamp my entire wardrobe, replacing my practical programmer clothes with pieces that made me feel confident and powerful. I started seeing a high-end cosmetologist who helped me develop a skincare routine that made me glow. I got a new haircut, shorter, edgier, more me. But the changes weren't just external. I started saying yes to things I'd always been too busy or too cautious to try. When my friend Jessica suggested a spontaneous weekend trip to Paris, I went. When my coding buddy Mark invited me to join his rock climbing group, I gave it a shot. I expanded my social circle, joining a book club and a women's entrepreneurship network. I started mentoring young programmers, especially girls who reminded me of myself at that age. My company continued to grow, and I found myself surrounded by people who appreciated me for who I was, not what I could give them. 1 year after Mom's Facebook post, I received an invitation to my cousin Tommy's wedding. My parents and Daisy would be there, but for the first time, the thought didn't fill me with dread. Last week, I was going through some old photos and found one from my college graduation. I barely recognized the girl in the picture, so eager to please, so desperate for approval, so afraid of standing up for herself. I thought about how she'd feel knowing where she'd end up, successful, strong, and finally, gloriously free. I took that photo and put it in a frame on my desk. Not as a reminder of what I'd lost, but of what I'd gained. Sometimes, walking away isn't an ending, it's a beginning. Sometimes, the family you're born into isn't the family you're meant to keep. And sometimes, the greatest act of self-love is simply saying no to those who treat your boundaries like suggestions, and your love like an ATM.